Well, I've been saying it repeatedly lately, but there's a growing split in America right now between what the economic headlines say and what working people are actually living through. Politicians point to stock markets, GDP growth, and corporate earnings, but millions of workers are measuring the economy in a very different way, by whether they can afford groceries, rent, gas, childcare, and a future. And increasingly, the answer is no. The latest consumer sentiment numbers paint a bleak picture. Reuters reported that the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index fell to record lows in May, as inflation fears intensified and Americans became increasingly pessimistic about the future. Rising gas prices, food costs, and worries about long-term inflation are crushing confidence. At the same time, the AP found that roughly two-thirds of Americans are actively cutting back on spending, despite the stock market hovering near record highs. That contradiction tells you everything you need to know about the modern economy. Wall Street may be thriving, but working-class households are pulling back because their paychecks are no longer enough. Higher-income Americans tied to stocks and assets continue to gain wealth, while everyone else falls further behind. This is what economists increasingly call the K-shaped economy. And now we're seeing just how severe that divide has become. A new report from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found what it described as a remarkable increase in food insecurity, particularly among lower-income households, families with young children, and workers without college degrees. Between late 2025 and early this year, more households reported skipping meals, struggling to find enough food, relying on savings for basic expenses, or seeking food assistance. The New York Fed also found a sharp decline in job-finding expectations among lower-income workers. Think about how staggering that is. We're constantly told the economy is strong. Yet one of the country's own Federal Reserve banks is documenting rising hunger, rising pessimism, and growing desperation among ordinary Americans. And it's not hard to understand why. Food prices continue rising. Reuters recently reported that grocery inflation accelerated sharply in April, with major increases in beef, coffee, dairy, fruits, vegetables, and other staples. Gas prices remain painfully high, hitting lower-income workers especially hard because commuting costs eat up a much larger share of their budgets. Walmart, one of the clearest indicators of working-class consumer health in the country, is already warned that higher fuel costs are squeezing household budgets and can soon push prices even higher across stores. When Walmart starts sounding alarms about consumer stress, that's a warning sign for the entire economy. Meanwhile, the political response feels almost surreal. Reuters reported that Trump has repeatedly focused attention on plans for a lavish White House ballroom project, while often minimizing or sidestepping the economic pain Americans are experiencing. Even some Republicans reportedly worry the administration appears detached from everyday struggles, like rent, groceries, health care, and wages that no longer keep pace with the cost of living. And then there's housing, perhaps the clearest example of how unequal this economy has become. CBS News recently highlighted research showing that homeownership increasingly depends less on income and more on whether your parents already had wealth or owned property. In other words, the American dream is becoming hereditary. If your family already owns assets, you have a pathway into stability. If not, you're increasingly locked out no matter how hard you work. That reality is crushing younger workers in particular. For decades, Americans were promised that hard work, education, and persistence would lead to security. But younger generations are staring at skyrocketing rents, unaffordable home prices, crushing debt, and wages that simply do not keep pace with inflation. And here's the important part labor needs to understand. Workers are not irrational for feeling pessimistic. The economy is not experienced through spreadsheets or stock indexes. It's experienced at the grocery store checkout line, at the gas pump, when the rent is due, when a medical bill arrives, when parents skip meals so their kids can eat. That's why these reports matter so much. Consumer sentiment is not just bad vibes. It reflects material reality. If millions of Americans are cutting spending, losing faith in the future, skipping meals, and giving up on the possibility of home ownership, then the problem is not perception, the problem is the economy itself. Because an economy where wealth keeps concentrating upward while insecurity trends downward is not healthy, it's not sustainable. And for working people, it increasingly feels like the promises of economic stability have been replaced with permanent precarity.